And last but not least, before we start to go into an exercise of looking at labels, I need you to know something important. We just mentioned cooking. And you may have, many of you, already thought, well, when I look at a bean or lentil or pea that's dry, or any grain that's dry that I have to cook, are they going to give me the final cooked weight serving size on the label? No, they won't. They'll give you the dry weight, and that's not going to be what you will need to know. You'll need to know what the final cooked weight is. The good news is that's simple. When you have, as you'll see on this slide here, a dry grain, that will be a simple process of just tripling the serving size. So if it says 50 grams, it'll be 150 grams. So on the specific label that you see here, we see not 50, but 58 grams. And I want to make a point. These serving sizes are not so precise that you need to worry about anything other than a simple rounding up exercise. 58 becomes 60, in other words. 52 would become 50. If you had 67 grams, just make it 70. It's much easier that way to do the math. So in this case here, and I actually picked a refined grain product for a reason, okay, because I want to be honest about this. And in this case, for instance, this was a macaroni and cheese product that my kids like. And how did I adjust it? Well, obviously we started with some vegetables before, and I don't add all of the cheese product. I add half or maybe a little bit less, and then for any added salt flavor they need, I use a healthier salt that we'll talk about in a different lesson. But point here, 220 won't be compared to 58 grams. Let's round up to 60 and triple it. 220 will be compared to 180 grams. All right? Now you're going to see in a moment that that is going to fall in the medium calorie density category. Now that you know where the numbers are that you need to know on a nutrition facts label to determine calorie density, let's start defining it. We clearly need to know where the calories are, and right there in the serving size, that magic number, you will almost always see in parentheses the gram weight. If you see 1 ounce, you now know it's going to be 30 grams. And as I said, in terms of rounding, technically it's 28.5, but we're rounding it right up to 30. Let's make it simple. Now, we're going to divide calorie density into 4 zones. Okay? We could combine level 3 and 4 into one zone if you like. Make it simple, I suppose. That's not illegitimate, but technically speaking, there are 4 zones. Low calories per bite, medium calories per bite, high calories per bite, and very high. Now, notice I wanted to emphasize, don't let red imply never, or red light, stop. It's more the highest level of caution, but if it is your non-negotiable, it's acceptable. That's what NN means, non-negotiable. And of course, you know, that's your 5% fun zone, the concept that we've talked about, that zero tolerance doesn't work. It's a pressure cooker without a release valve, and we don't want a therapeutic lifestyle change process to blow up in our face, otherwise it won't be successful. Point again here is that the portion and frequency control exercise needs only be applied to foods in the higher zones, particularly 3 and 4, and in certain cases, level 2, which we can discuss, and thin liquid beverage calories, which we've already discussed in a previous lesson. As opposed to feel free, have at it, no PFC, no portion or frequency control that you see in the level 1 low calorie density foods. They get us so full on low calories that there's no need to portion control them. In fact, to crowd out the other foods, we want to specifically not worry about how much we eat of them and frankly eat more of them. That's how you can actually end up eating more food for less calories. Now we're going to take it a little step further, the same 4 levels, but we're going to put numbers in there. When you have a food that's calories are less than the serving size, let's say 100 calories for a 150 gram serving, that's low in calories per bite. Less than 1 calorie per gram, which you know must have a lot of water, because as you now know already, protein has 4 calories per gram, carbs, sugar and starch have 4 calories per gram, and fat has 9. And if you must know, alcohol has 7. So if a food has less than 1 calorie per gram, something must be in there, a lot of it, that is not calorie-based. And it can't be fiber. There's no food that's going to give you a 100 grams of fiber per serving. It's water content. It's mostly water content that explains that. Okay? Those are the free foods in the sense of have more, and I want you to, as a poster child, to think in that group of whole fruits and vegetables, with rare exceptions like avocado, which is technically a fruit, which is high in water, but since its calories are fat, ends up averaging to medium calorie density. Virtually all fruits and vegetables are free. Fruit, for instance, has an average of 250 calories per pound. Okay, remember a pound's 454 grams. So it has less calories than its gram weight, and therefore, even if you ate 5 pounds of mixed fruits over a day, you'd be at only about 1,250 calories. So fruit is not the problem when it comes to diabetes prevention or health. Trust me, that is the fact, the one place you should be spending most of the time satisfying your sweet tooth. As we said, finish a meal with dessert. Medium is when foods land between 1 and 2 calories per gram. For instance, in that previous example, let's switch it to 150 calories for 100 grams. Let's throw something like guacamole in there, and I'll tell you why, since we just mentioned avocado, which ends up at medium calorie density, and typically we use for guacamole. If there's not a lot of chewing involved in that food, and it's something that there's a lot of added salt, and it makes it hyper palatable, and you don't have a lot of chewing, so it kind of slides right down the gullet real quick, that may be a food you have to consider for portion control to some degree, but this is a mild consideration zone, all right? It's a mild consideration zone in medium calorie density. Once we get to high, some of you may want to just make it simple and consider everything above 2 calories per gram a more cautionary food and ask yourself, is this a non-negotiable, or as I've said before, how much do you need to not want to kill me till the next lesson type of food. But because technically speaking there's 4, I'm going to go through the second 2 and complete the process. High is from 2 to 4 calories per gram. Okay, so for instance, if you had 150 calories for 50 grams of food, right, about an ounce and a half, that would be a high calorie density food. Right? You may find many high fiber cereals in that category, for instance. Not that they're bad, they have a lot of chewing and so on, etc. But that might be a good idea to look at what the serving size on the box is and then put it into the bowl. And if the bowl looks empty, find a smaller bowl. We'll get to that in the environment key, but that would be the easiest way rather than having to measure each time. Train your eye and then use a smaller container, whether it's a smaller plate or a smaller bowl for things that are more calorie dense, and a bigger plate and a bigger bowl for things that are lower in calorie density or calories per bite of food. Last but not least, we have the very high zone, and some of you might have already caught why it's very high, and that is when you're above 4 calories per gram, you have to be fat containing, because only fat, other than alcohol, and we're not eating alcohol in food form usually, has more than 4 calories per gram. Fat has 9 calories per gram. So typically these foods are both dry and carbohydrate and high fat at the same time, like a fried tortilla chip, for instance. But could just be purely fat, like butter and oils and etc., cheese and so forth, full fat cheese and so forth. Okay? Reminder again, thin liquid beverage calories fall into category 4 due to their physical property of rapidly emptying through the stomach. Sure, they're high in water, but they're not contained in a cage that sticks around and gets stuck, so to speak, for a significant period of time in the stomach to cause the weight stretch receptors in the stomach to fire. They just run through the stomach too rapidly. That's the way I want you to remember thin liquid beverage calories as being in category 4, meaning have it, but full disclosure, and you have been forewarned as to the benefits versus risks, then it's your decision. Now, like we've done on this Reality Meets Science nutrition criteria quick read card, cheat sheet, if you will, you might decide to take these criteria and put it into a type of form where you can just pull it out of your pocket while you're doing grocery shopping or wherever you may be, to start learning until you memorize the concepts, which are actually very easy once you get through them all. Once you get through these 5 nutrition criteria and you really understand them, they will be the mass majority of what you need to know to get you where you need to be to prevent not only diabetes but disease in general. So let's keep looking here, and now looking at some frozen entrees. We have 2 fish dishes, and they're both the same serving size. I point this out because the point is they will both get you just as full, one versus the other. So if it's 6 of this, 1/2 dozen of the other to you, and you don't care in the difference between flavors, one has 50 less calories than the other. Maybe not a big deal, but over a lifetime that could make a difference. On the other hand, if you like the other one better and you like cod better than salmon, etc., it's non-negotiable, that's fine. But this isn't a dramatic difference in calories, but I do want to point out to you the simplicity of where to find the number you need. That's the how full will I get number. That's the gram weight, and that it's sitting there on all labels versus the calories. This is step one of the 5 criteria you'll need to know. Very important. Keep it in mind. Okay. One is right on the threshold of low to medium calorie density, obviously, right there at 1 calorie per gram. And the other one is just creeping into medium in terms of the bottom one in calorie density. Now, the top, we have a frozen burrito, okay, from Amy's. It's a light in sodium one. To get to the point here, 320 for 170 grams of food means it falls in the high end of medium. But what you probably already know is the most significant calorie per bite contributor. It's not the beans, they're cooked in water, it's the wrap. And from many wraps, you can actually take off about half and it's still fully wrapped. There's usually about 2 layers or more of wrap around most wraps that you can remove some and not lose virtually much of any fullness whatsoever and make up for it in other ways. So taking that concept to where you don't necessarily have an easy label to read, though you could go to the Starbucks website, you don't need that once you start to understand this concept. You look at something where you could be on the run and say, you know what, I'm going to invest in my health, I'm going to spend a little extra, get full on less of a lot of things, including sodium. Getting the egg white feta spinach sandwich at Starbucks and taking off about half or more, as you see on the right-hand picture, and I just fold it up like a soft taco and eat that, but then ordered a separate protein box focusing on the apples and the grapes, high water, high fiber, and the hard-boiled egg whites. By the way, the hot sandwich and the cold hard-boiled egg whites was a nice oral contrast. It felt very nice palate-wise to have that. And then, of course, I tossed most of the yolks because that's where the calorie and cholesterol concentration is. I also nixed the 2 cheese wedges because I already have some feta cheese. It's definitely not a non-negotiable, not my favorite cheese. So all that stuff you see in the front part of the picture on the right was tossed out. I did save the peanut butter for later, but it wasn't something I needed at the time, and had the small whole wheat raisin and nut bread as a bit of my non-negotiable per se. But you see how this works. Dilution is the solution without being extremist. There was some wrap, but there was less. There was a portion control piece of bread with some raisins for sweet. That was fine, but we had high water and high protein and high water, high fiber diluting everywhere. Now, Beyond Beef and the other vegan burgers, I will have to point out, I am a plant-predominant flexitarian. I really believe that it is best to be plant-predominant, if not plant-pure. For most people, I don't think that will work, but for those of you that are plant-pure and healthy vegan, by all means, bless you. For metabolic health purposes, though, I have to be clear that when you're looking at a very lean beef, and this is a 96% lean beef on the left, okay, 96% lean ground beef, versus a newly released about 3 different vegan burgers that are trying to emulate the flavor of beef, you end up typically compromising significantly in terms of calories due to high fat content as well as sodium. So let's take a look. Same serving size, same 113 grams, 4 ounces, but I covered it up with the arrow because I want you to focus on the gram weight. 140 calories with the ultra lean beef, and that's 96%. 96% lean. All right, turkey breast is 99, chicken breast is 98, ultra lean beef 96, 95 or higher. That's where you see game meats. Most ground beef is 90% at best, but you can find 96% lean. And at 90% lean even, half the calories will be coming from fat. So that being said, 270 calories for the same fullness with the Beyond Beef burger. So I think a more reasonable approach might be to have less meat and maybe amplify yourself with whole beans in some way, shape, or form, or lentils in your lifestyle or in any single meal, and achieve the same result with a whole lot less calories and sodium. The fiber that they are talking about also in the beef burger, the plant burger is not something to write home about, but we'll get into that in a later video on protein and fiber. Dilution is the solution. I want to point out something to you. Right around that lower end of medium calorie density zone is where we may want to think about averaging. The American Institute for Cancer Research has actually identified an overall eating pattern that has around 1.25 calories per gram or less as a significant way to reduce risk for cancer. Obviously, excess calories drive not only diabetes, but also cancer, as well as heart disease, stroke, dementia. That's what we're trying to point out here in this Diabetes Prevention Masterclass. And whatever other modality you might be listening to this lesson if it's not part of the DPM. That being said, we can't have a approach in lifestyle that has no high calorie density foods. Let me give you a specific example of a way I use dilution as the solution. I like a whole wheat crunch. Triscuits are made from whole wheat with just a touch of oil and typically more salt than I like, but they have a hint of salt Triscuit. I also found a phenomenal pasta sauce in Dave's Gourmet roasted garlic and sweet basil. Specifically that flavor, not all of the rest, but that flavor of Dave's Gourmet has a very reasonable sodium content. More on that later, but let's focus on the calories here. If I have a serving of Triscuits with 2 servings in a bowl that I'm dipping the Triscuits into, of the Dave's Gourmet, let's see what happens. We'll have 240 grams worth of Dave's Gourmet thick, filling food, right? 240 grams plus the 30 grams from the Triscuits for 270 grams total. Now let's add up the calories. 140 from the Dave's Gourmet, 120 from the Triscuits, and what do you have? You've got 260 calories total, despite one item being high in calorie density, very high in calorie density technically, for 280 grams of food. 270 is less than 280. Hint, hint, that might therefore even buy you an extra Triscuit or 2 and still be less than 1.25 calories per gram. Ta-da! There you go, reality meets science. Now let's wind up here and discuss 5 points I want to make sure that you have to wrap things up. Our point is to maximize foods high in water content that preferably most of the time also have high fiber, also, by the way, modest in fat. It's not that low fat in and of itself is the issue as much as that fat has more than double the calories per gram as other common calories, protein and carbs. You could, if you really adjusted it, actually eat a higher fat by percentage of calories food as long as you really leveraged your fruits and very low calorie density foods to average it out. But maximize foods high in water, most of the time hopefully high in fiber, usually low in fat, but not always, right? But usually low in fat, or high water and high protein. So again, fruits and vegetables, high water, high fiber, egg whites, low fat, fat-free yogurts, fish, chicken breast, that ultra lean beef, high water, high protein. Of course, beans are great for both, high fiber, high water, and high protein. I should say all 3 things. Wonderful option and food choice. We eat far too little of in the United States. And then you end up crowding out the rest and make it easy to have a 5% fun zone without guilt and still managing calories and achieving that health and wellness you're looking for. 2, right, we want to try to, as I said in number 1, implied, cut down to a, quote, 5% fun zone. It's not literal 5%, remember. That's just a concept that zero tolerance doesn't work. Pressure cooker without a release valve, but doing nothing is a balloon mortgage. And how much do you need of whatever to not want to kill me really defines what 5% is in this case. Those foods that are in your non-negotiable list and thin liquid beverage calories, very dry and fatty foods, just try to find a way to manage them so that you have just enough and use calorie density so you're not left hungry and just trying to portion control those foods. It won't work. 3, as we mentioned, begin meals with something that's high in water content. Even if it's not a veggie, you're going to a restaurant, having a yogurt on the way, having a meal replacement shake, a piece of fruit, something to take the edge off the hunger so you're not diving into the bread basket if it's a situation where there's a lot of people and it would be odd to not have the chip or the bread basket there. But also, while you're at the restaurant, start meals with a bean or vegetable-based broth soup. I'd recommend for sodium purposes to order a cup, not a bowl if possible, and eat with a fork. More on that later. Or a garden veggie salad that's based on garden, more garden than croutons, cheese, and salami, obviously, and dress it up just lightly. A little vinegar, touch of oil, your favorite dressing, but in modest amount, etc. And then you can actually feel full and less calories and feel satisfied much more likely, as well as finishing your meals with whole fruit. Most commonly, not always, realize we're going to have some sweets here or there, but dessert should most commonly be fresh fruit. And last but not least, between meals, fill the gap with foods high in water and fiber or high in water and protein. Fruits and vegetables are fantastic, but there are obviously other options that I talked about, including the possibility that you'll save some of that meal at the restaurant for a snack later because you're already full and you can stop without a problem. Okay? That wraps up the lesson on calorie density. So important, so key for you to your health. See you in the next lesson.